Hi there. Thanks for joining us. If you are new to my work and you've never heard one of my podcast episodes before, I help parents of very selective eaters to get back on track and learn how to enjoy and love new foods. So if you're totally new, I would get started at pickyeaterstest.com or thepickeyeaterstest.com. Either way, you should end up at the same spot. And you can get an idea of what level your child is at, how they're kind of comparing to a typical child, and where to get started. Right. So that's a great place to get started. And today's episode, we are talking all about oral motor red flags because this area is often very, very, very overlooked. I've talked about it before, but a lot of kids, or I should say, a lot of parents of picky eaters, they know about certain buzzwords, like they've heard of sensory, but they are not really talking about the oral motor issues. So, we're going to talk about some red flags that you can look for today in your child and see if maybe this is an area for you that has also been overlooked as why your child is struggling with foods. Okay, so we're going to talk about, I believe I have five different red flags for you today. Okay. So, oral motor skills um, and picky eating, they really go hand in hand. And I'm going to be totally honest. I think I've maybe come across one child that oral motor was not playing an issue at all. But for most of our picky eaters, because they are struggling with usually these certain textures, like they're struggling with eating meats and vegetables very, very often, right? Those are usually the first things to go. And they're also, coincidentally, or maybe not, they're also the hardest things to chew. They're also the most fibrous foods that require the most chewing endurance to break down foods, right? So, a lot of our picky eaters have diets that are soft foods or processed foods because they're literally easier to eat. Right. So, stay tuned. So we have five things that I want you to look for today. And of course, you're not going to necessarily be able to assess it at a level that, a professional is, but I'm going to give you things today that you're going to be able to say, like, okay, I think I need more information. I'm seeing some of these red flags that Christine mentioned, and let's go to the next step. Like, let's figure this out once and for all, right? Okay. So, oral motor skills means that you're able to chew the food using the tongue to move the food around your mouth successfully and swallow that food back, right? So, what is supposed to happen? Where's my little mouth here? So, what's supposed to happen when you chew is you put the food into your mouth, you bring it, your tongue will help bring that food, or they call it lateralize, like, because you're going to bring it to the sides of your mouth, right? You're going to bring that food to the molar area, the back molar area. And that muscle is going, there's this muscle back here, the masseter muscle. It's going to help chew the food. Okay. And you're actually supposed to move it from side to side. So one side does a little bit of the chewing, and then your tongue's going to come, sweep the food over to the other side, chew, 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 the tongue brings the food back into the center of your tongue. Your tongue suctions up to the palate, swallows it back, and all of the food when you open your mouth should be gone, right? So when we're talking about oral motor skills, we're talking about the ability of the mouth, the tongue, the lips, the teeth to do the jobs that they are supposed to be doing. Are they doing it adequately? Are they doing it at all? Are they able to do their jobs? Okay, so that's what we're talking about here today. Okay, so, first red flag is difficulty chewing, right? So, sometimes you might not even realize that they are having difficulty chewing. We've done so many evaluations where the parents said, oh, they chew just fine. That's not the issue. I know it's not that, right? But by the time they leave, they have a different perspective, right? Because now they understand what exactly their child is and isn't doing, right? So, signs could be it's taking them a very long time to chew. Okay. So, if you have an eater that is at the table seemingly forever and you have to like take them out because like you're on to the next part of your day, and they're just taking just an excessively long time. So I'm not talking about hanging out at the table together and everyone's enjoying themselves and it's a casual, that of course that could be an hour. But if you have a small snack and it's taking them an hour, if it's taking over an hour every meal, over 45 minutes, honestly, a regular a meal should really be about 30 minutes. And that's just really a general meal. It's not like, going out with friends or family and having, an interactive time together. Of course, that's going to take longer. I'm talking about you have a meal, you're sitting down and you're eating it from start to finish completion. It should not take more than 20 to 30 minutes to do that, especially kids' portions. We shouldn't be giving them like huge portions. They should be able to finish a meal in 20 to 30 minutes. And it is taking a lot of our picky eaters. We have parents say it takes them 45 minutes, it takes them an hour, right? We do have the opposite end of the spectrum where they'll say, oh no, in like 3 to 5 minutes, they're completing the meal. I'll tell you that that's also a problem, right? That's too fast, right? We want to be somewhere in the sweet spot. We want them to be between 20 and 30 minutes, typical meal length. If they're finishing in 5 minutes, they're either not eating enough, shoving it in their mouth, um, and or um, they're eating foods that like just completely break down and dissolve in their mouth and like require no work. So they're able to eat super, super fast. But if you are chewing and swallowing foods appropriately, it should take between 20 and 30 minutes. So difficulty chewing, taking a long time to chew. Okay. Um, the other part of that is, um, you might not notice it, but, um, you know, specifically eating foods that are soft. So if they are having difficulty chewing, they're going to be choosing softer foods like fruits are softer foods, yes. But even things just like, puffs or Cheetos or chips, breads, those things can break down in your mouth with really saliva, right? Those processed foods, those barely, you barely need any effort to break them down enough to get them swallowed back. If you think about vegetables, and if you do this experiment yourself today with vegetables or meats, count how many chews. Notice how many times you move it from side to side. Okay. Our picky eaters they don't have that endurance. They don't have that chewing endurance to break that food down well enough to then be able to swallow it back. Right. So if they're having difficulty chewing, they're also probably spitting out foods or rejecting foods that require more effort to break down. Okay, so that's our first one, right? Difficulty chewing. Number two is swallowing issues. So this is like coughing or gagging on certain textures of foods or when they're eating. Now, hopefully, they're not doing this for every food that they're eating. But a lot of our picky eaters will sometimes cough or choke or gag on specific types of foods. Usually it's not all of them, but it can be, right? Some of our kids, they will stuff foods in their mouth and they don't have the awareness that there's still a lot of food in there. And they'll go to swallow it before it's broken down well enough and they'll cough or choke on it, right? So we don't want that. So if there's anything like that, that is another big red flag that they have some oral motor difficulties. All right, number three, avoiding certain textures, right? We talked about avoiding certain categories of foods, but they might also avoid certain textures. Chewy food specifically, that is definitely going to be a little bit more effortful. Food's going to get chewy foods might get almost like stuck to their teeth. And if they have poor oral motor skills, they're not going to be able to use that tongue efficiently to get out those small pieces of chewy foods that get left behind. So, chewy foods, they also might have a difficult time, with certain mixed textures. So, a mixed texture is when there's like maybe like a hard solid, like maybe like a piece of carrot, along with like maybe like in a soup, right? So you have like liquid with some solid, so it's mixed. So they might have difficulty, just sort of managing two different textures at the same time. And that's usually because their oral motor skills aren't great. They can't manage food very well. So managing two different foods is going to be just too hard for them. So mixed textured foods as well. Okay. So avoiding certain textures, that's number 3. Okay. So this is kind of sad, if you're like hearing this and you're like, okay, so far these are sounding just like my child, please head over to the pickyeaterstest.com. And that's eaters with an S in it, pickyeaterstest.com, to start our quiz. It's a 2-minute quiz and it will get you started. You'll have an idea of what level your child is at so that you know where to start, right? So it's just a starting point. But from there, you can watch our free video and learn more about why your child is specifically picky. All right, now back to our list of our 5 reasons, or 5, sorry, our 5 red flags of disordered oral motor. Okay, so number 4 is messy eating. And this could look different. This could look a few different ways, right? So some of our picky eaters are actually very messy, like outwardly, like as they're eating, there's food on their face and there's kind of food just all over the place on the floor, on the table. And they have trouble actually realizing that there's food left, right? There's something to clean out. They don't feel it maybe. And that sometimes can be linked to a sensory thing as well. Um, but kids that are very messy eaters, and they're putting the food in sideways, they're going all over, they're putting in huge bites of food, right? Those messy eaters often have some oral motor challenges as well. And I'm not just talking about on the outside, like wiping their face clean type of a thing, but on the inside, it's very messy. So, one of the parts of our evaluation is that we're asking our kids, we look in their mouth right before they go to swallow and right after they swallow, because we want to see where the food is before they swallow and where, if any, the food is after they swallow. Because again, your tongue's job is supposed to bring the food into basically like a little ball in the middle of their tongue right before you go to swallow. But our picky eaters have food all over their tongue. They're in the sides of their tongue. There's still foods in their teeth. There's foods all over the tongue usually. And then after they go to swallow, we look again. And oftentimes there's still a lot of little pieces of food still scattered around their mouth. And more than that, a lot of times when we say, do you feel any food in your mouth right now? They will often say no. Sometimes they'll say yes, but often they will say no. They don't even realize that there's still food in their mouth. So, again, that is a red flag for oral motor component to your picky eating. Okay. And our last one is food pocketing, number 5. So, what does that mean? Food pocketing. So, when your child is pocketing food, it means that food is getting stuck in the sides of their mouth. So, the pocket is the area between their cheek and their teeth, right? So, right in the sides of their mouth. So, they could be pocketing up top on the top. Part of their mouth in that pocket, or on the bottom sides. So, I would say most often is on the bottom. They could also have food stuck up on their palate as well. Oftentimes, it's very much on the bottom, on the sides. So, if your child is putting food in their mouth, maybe even overstuffing, and then it seems like the food just sits in their mouth for a long time, a lot of times that's because they sort of ran out of steam with chewing, or they don't have the oral motor skills of their tongue to gather that food, bring it back onto their tongue where it's supposed to be, and swallow it back. Okay, so these things are going to hinder your child's ability to eat safely, efficiently, effectively, and it's not going to be as pleasant as an experience. It's not just we eat it and we swallow it. So when those things are sort of amiss or they're not working as optimally as they should be, oh, excuse me, kids are going to regress in their eating and they're going to eat things that are easier for them to handle, right? So when you think of processed foods, when you think of chicken nuggets, when you think of food that comes, from a bag, you're talking about foods that require little to no effort for the mouth to break down. So that's the diet of our picky eaters, right? And you have to think that even if if your child, maybe that wasn't the original reason why they became picky, right? Maybe it wasn't oral motor, maybe it was sensory, maybe they had a negative experience. There's a lot, right? We talk about lots of different reasons why kids are picky on this podcast and in my work. But if your child is consistently eating these softer processed foods, what do you think is going to happen to these muscles? They're going to atrophy. When you don't use it, you lose it, right? The good news is you can rebuild that muscle, but if you think about it, muscles in your body require active, regular use to keep and maintain them. So if they're not regularly using that muscle, if they're mostly eating foods that require minimal jaw work to break it down, those muscles in the jaw are going to get weak. So even if it wasn't maybe the reason your child became picky in the first place, if those are the foods they're eating, there's going to be some level of muscle weakness. There's just gotta be. It's it's just, like human biology. Like that's just what's going to happen next logically. If that's the foods they're eating, that's what's going to happen. Okay, so what do you do about it? What can we do about it? Um, Most feeding therapists don't have the training in the oral motor piece because it's not something that we're taught about uh, in our schooling. This is above and beyond sort of extra work that I have done personally to learn what these are. In fact, my school regularly discouraged us from going and exploring oral motor. It was never something, and even going into textures and picky eating, that just was never some I never had a class on that, right? So all of my knowledge has come from me learning from experts and professionals that have have this understood much better than I did, right? So I learned so much from them. But if you're just going to, regular run of the mill feeding therapist, they might not have the expertise to tackle this piece of the piggy eating puzzle, right? So you want to sort of vet your professional and making sure that they do understand this component very well and have this training to be able to tease out, well, what muscles and what is really going on here. And usually somebody that has that expertise has done myofunctional therapy training, because that is a training that very much goes deep into the muscles of the face and how they're supposed to be working, much above and beyond what a typical feeding therapist has gone through in their training, right? So we we definitely recommend that you vet your therapist for that. But um, you know, also, getting on these problems earlier than later because, the muscle strength is not something that, will like magically one day, like you can't like outgrow uh limited muscle strength, right? Like, so if those muscles have become atrophied and weak, they're going to remain that way until you work them out again, to some degree. Um, and that's not to say that you can't work them out in other ways, right? So, we do that on in a variety of ways. Sometimes we use tools, sometimes we use food, sometimes we combine them together. Very often, the goal is to get them from a tool to food. It totally depends on the child and where they're at with food and their psychological state towards food. So it's very nuanced. Well, which approach is going to work best for your child, right? So, of course, what I would recommend is to come and work with us, right? So, I actually just relaunched our signature program to help parents. And I've renamed it from Picky Plate to Clean Slate to Unlocking Meal Times. And it's really a transformation program that takes kids from fearful to foodie. And part of it is understanding the components of your child's specific oral motor challenges and then where to start with them. So, if you're struggling with this, the easiest place to start is our quiz, which if you go to pickyeaterstest.com, you can access this 2-minute quiz and it tell you exactly where your child is at and the next steps to take for your child, right? So hopefully these 5 red flags, right? So difficulty chewing, swallowing issues, avoiding certain textures, messy eating, and food pocketing are things that you can kind of look for yourself and be like, okay, I see some of these things happening, or maybe you don't see them happening, and that's great. But again, even that knowledge to know, okay, well, I don't see literally any of those things she was talking about. I don't think that's my issue. That's knowledge too. And that's really helpful too, because if that's not your issue, great. We don't have to focus on that. Let's focus on, well, where are the issues? And next week, we're going to talk about the 4 pillars of feeding success. And that's exactly what I go into. If it's not that oral motor piece, is it going to be one of these other things, right? So we'll go into that next week. So until then, please jump on, take our test. It's so easy to take, and it'll give you a great foundation of where you're even starting from with your child. So we will hopefully see you on the inside of that. And if not, I'll see you next week. Have a great week.
Thank you for listening to How to Unpicky Your Picky Eater. To learn more about achieving your child's feeding goals, check out Christine's website at foodologyfeeding.com. And be sure to tune in next time to How to Unpicky Your Picky Eater.